Thanks for joining us another Friday. We've made it another edition of Take Two. It's been another big political week. I keep waiting for a week where there's nothing to talk about, and
It'll never happen.
It just does not happen. And Lieutenant Governor Spencer Cox is the big talker this week.
That's right.
I actually spoke to him recently and asked if he was going to announce, and he did announce that he's running for governor, if he would like to be on our podcast someday if someone else I knew possibly ran. He said yes. We'll get to that in just a minute. Okay.
He couldn't handle this podcast. This is a very, this is a high bar.
I think
it's a
he
high
could.
bar.
Yeah, this is not like Cox and Friends. This
Cox
would
and
be
Friends.
like,
This is Hatch and Friends.
Yeah,
Cox and a brain.
This is an arena in here.
It's
With-
true, but
with a
this is
different point of view.
This is exciting because game on, but it's a long game on at this point. We've got almost 18 months till the election. Let's talk before we talk about anything else. There are many, many other names who
So many names.
could possibly announce.
So many names.
I've heard Greg Hughes may run.
I heard Heidi Hatch may run.
I actually
don't
have
know.
thought about running. I don't
You
know
should.
if 2020
I've
is
heard Jim
my year.
Dabakis might run.
Yeah.
Against why stop? Just keep going. Once you get the machine going, Jim, you could take one, take two, take three, you keep going.
I feel like I got to start on a city council or someplace else first before they let me run.
No.
But Greg, you are on a long list. We'll get to that list in a
Sure.
minute of names that are bandied around. On a 1 to 10 serious levelness, do you have a number or does it depend on the day?
But no, I will tell you, I've enjoyed public policy. I was served in the legislature for 16 years. I was in House leadership for 8 of those 16 years and served as speaker for 4 years. And I do love public policy. And so I think it's important that you get in, you serve in the legislative body. It's a part-time, you have a day job, you have other responsibilities. It takes its toll. But I miss it, and I miss public policy. I think there's a lot going on in Utah that will require heavy lifting. And so I have seriously looked at that race, and I would put it in the 7 to 8 category in terms of seriousness of that race. But I am looking at it.
7 to 8 is fairly high.
Yep.
Jim's involved in a race of his own, so we'll leave him there, the Salt Lake mayoral race. But there's a lot of other names on this list. Jeff Birmingham, who is a Utah County businessman. I know he's been fundraising. John Huntsman Jr., which I think is probably the biggest name.
the
don't
big
you think?
gorilla. John Huntsman is in Moscow thinking and contemplating, and somewhere, somehow, pretty soon, I would think he's going to have to make a decision. Yes, I'm running. No, I'm not running. But whatever Cox is saying and whatever the rest of the field are saying, they have an eye out to John Huntsman Jr. because you throw that name and that money and that experience in, and it becomes an entirely different race.
So let's talk about Lieutenant Governor Spencer Cox basically set, I guess, a timetable for some people in some aspects. How soon would a Huntsman have to announce that he's running?
Well, I think that Jim is right. I think that would be a tour de force. I think he's been our governor. It's happened in this country before where someone has served as governor and they've come back and run and has successfully won re-election or election and become governor. So I think that you would be crazy to assume a field and not think that it would change drastically if former Governor Huntsman were to enter into the race. I think that gives everybody who looks at that race some pause. I, on a personal level, have been close with that family, with Huntsman's father, John Huntsman Sr., and I think that the contributions to our state that the state of Utah has benefited from are limitless and countless, and I think that it does. I think it's a big deal. He will have a shorter runway than the little guys that may want to run in terms of how long it would take him to ramp up a campaign, but I think that if he's not able to make a decision sooner rather than later, then you'll see a lot of people without knowing that are just going to get in, and I think some will not be persuaded either way. I don't know if the announcement this week would change at all if Governor Huntsman were to get in that race.
True, and there's a lot of names on the list. Congressman or former Congressman Jason Chaffetz, Amy Winder Newton was one of the more recent ones, and I think it would be great if we're going to have a huge mix to have some women, at least one woman in the mix there. Representative Rob Bishop. She's on the Salt Lake County Council. So I think that we've got a good mix here of people. It could definitely get to be bigger. Did I forget anyone on the list? I feel like
Attorney General Sean Reyes.
Sean Reyes, possibly,
Thomas Wright, we said.
Thomas Wright.
Look, he was the state party, Republican Party chair.
let me talk directly to the people of Utah.
Okay, good. This is a podcast, but you look at the camera for the people who are watching.
To those
Democrats, we're screwed here.
This is a good
I mean,
group of
we're
Republicans.
not even. There aren't any whispers. There isn't anybody maneuvering around. There is not a soul who wants to run for governor. So I am appealing to you now. We may all need to become Republicans and go get registered for the Republican primary if we don't come up with a candidate. I mean, the problem is last time,
There's really no
Michael
murmurs or
Weinhold,
whispers
not
or
a
nothing?
soul. There's nobody I know that's thinking about running. Michael Weinhold spent $3.5 million last time. A terrific business guy. Started with nothing, ended up with a multi-billion-dollar company. Would have been so much better a governor than Herbert. I mean, on so many levels, and yet, pay to play Gary won again in a landslide.
I was about to compliment Jim for the being real, not having fake news, and all of a sudden he went off.
He went fake news. Don't do that. Here's the situation.
He wouldn't have been
though.
better than the governor now.
Hopefully
There's no-
some names will
He
start
would
going.
have.
And I was impressed in these last congressional races that we had some women running, strong women, made them a name for themselves. Jenny Wilson ended up as the Salt Lake County mayor, Shireen Gurbani on the council there. So I think that we have good people out there. We
Jenny
just need
lost
them to
by
stand up.
50, and Shireen lost by 25. I mean, and look, I'm saying we ought to run, and we have to find a candidate. But I agree kind of with the focus on, let's focus on the places we absolutely are competitive rather than spend millions of dollars on a gubernatorial race that we're not going to be competitive on.
It is
so
a
we
tough
got to
race.
make sure that the right Republican wins.
Is there any chance that Governor Herbert might be like, nah, I'm going to do it and run again? He's 71, but
Yeah, no, he's entitled to change his mind at any time.
He could run as a Democrat.
He would not do that.
No.
I would just say this.
As soon as
Here's
that came
the
out
good
of my
news
mouth, I
about
said,
this segment
no,
and this
no.
topic. If you have an open seat for governor in our state, which doesn't happen very often,
yeah.
you want a deep field. You want a lot of people to step forward because in reality, without an incumbent, nobody is really running against one another in that race. There is a case to be made to the citizens of this state, and let the most compelling narrative, and let the leadership of those candidates shine through, and let the people decide. And I'm telling you, the deeper the pool and the more earnest that campaign season is, Utah wins. And so I think that we'll see even names we're not even discussing now. My hunch is, with an open seat, you will see people step forward. I do think that the big X factor is Ambassador Huntsman.
Yeah.
I think that will change some people's vision of the field. But I do believe that even if John Huntsman Jr. were to decide to do it, for the benefit of the state, we need a deep pool and a
I
robust
got an
debate.
idea.
Absolutely.
A
Okay.
dead pool or a deep pool?
A deep
pool. Okay.
Yeah.
Look, Huntsman, here's the offer.
Do you have an offer
I
for
think
him?
I speak for everyone in Utah. So I'm careful to do this.
Jim does that.
If you'll
He
come
thinks
home,
Utah's the avenues, by the way.
He does.
if you'll come home and run, speaking for most Democrats, we will totally get behind you. If you run against Trump in a Republican primary, that's where you need to run. Run, baby, run. You know what? The Constitution is hanging by a thread, and I think you're meant to come home and run for president. You did it after you left ambassador last time, right? You came back and you ran against the
That is
person
true,
that
isn't it?
The timing
appointed
was wrong,
you.
though, because Romney was already in the race, and
No, remember, Obama appointed him to be an
Yes.
ambassador. He came home and ran against the guy that appointed him in history. You know how it repeats itself?
Yeah.
Come home, run against Trump. I
I'm
personally,
fairly-
let me be there. I'll be there
You've
with the
got money.
first
Here he
money.
comes.
good.
I'm ready
Daddy
to go.
Warbucks
I don't
is ready
think he
to
needs
go.
your cash.
Okay, I
Although
don't
I'm
have
pretty
any
sure
money.
President Obama put him on another continent on purpose, hoping that he wouldn't run against him.
didn't work,
No, it
did
did
it?
not.
Didn't
He
it?
came home.
It didn't.
All right, well, this is exciting. Spencer Cox has got us talking about this. We love your green logo. And you're gonna have to all step up your Twitter game because I feel like he's owning the millennial
Oh my
Utah
gosh,
Jazz
I
crowd.
have no Twitter game.
I know,
might be
so
in trouble
that's where
here.
you've got to step it up. And he did tell me not too long ago that if you both decide to run, that he would come on the podcast. I said, could you wrestle? He said that might be weird. So maybe no wrestling, just talking. But hopefully we could join the two podcasts together, but we'll have to wait and see.
When I retired, they came up with a retirement video, no watch.
You have to have a job to retire first, right?
Yeah, so this is from the Senate. So they interview Cox, and Cox says, Greg was really good. Here's what Cox said. Well, the first time I met Dabakis, we were at Utah Valley University, and we were dedicating some government building, and this guy started talking to me, and I didn't really know him, and I didn't know him. He was a freshman legislator, nothing lower than a freshman House member. So we just started talking.
And so you don't talk to the new kids?
No, I mean, I talked, we talked, and I said, gee, you have a nice suit on. And then now Cox is telling the story many years later, and he says, Dabakis said I had a great suit on, which wasn't true. I don't dress well. He said, I think he was trying to pick up on me. Spencer,
Jim,
I'm a married man. I just want to say that.
Wow.
That's what he said in the
he has a pretty
retirement
darling
video.
wife, Abby, too. But Abby seems to be open to him thinking other boys look cute or whatever, because she likes a lot of the Utah Jazz boys. We're going to get in trouble
if
talking
Abby
about
would
this on this podcast.
run, that would be something.
Like maybe she could be the
is.
lieutenant. All right.
Yeah.
Let's move on to other topics. I forget what's on our list because that was the most exciting, but we've got lots more to talk about. The LDS Church
like
this
that last
week,
story.
yeah, that was a good one, comes out against the National Equality Act. There's concern here that this would ruin LGBTQ rights. The LDS Church, though, saying that they don't think this is a good one because it kills religious rights in this. Jim, what say you?
Look, here's what we're talking about. You know where it says it is against the law to discriminate against people on account of race, national origin, disability, all of those things? What this would do is put on the back of that, on the next line, or gay people. And somehow religious people, some, are somehow worried that by adding gay people to non-discrimination, it somehow religiously discriminates against them. Well, it's just weird to me. I just don't see the connection.
Well, I can.
Are they writing the law wrong, maybe?
I can explain the connection in it. I think that I have a picture. It has all of us as ceremonial signing, where we put the religious liberties and the anti-discrimination legislation together. I think what the fear, Jim, is that if discriminating against the LGBT community could be described as a faith that does not believe that is sanctioned by God, then that could be considered discriminatory, and it could put them on the wrong side of the law. If we could, and I think this is the way Utah did it, and I'm very proud of what we did in Utah, if we could combine the religious liberties and even if it's just repeating what people think they already know, but the right to worship according to the dictates of their conscience, along with the anti-discrimination for housing and employment and everything else, I think if we do it together and with one voice, I think Utah did it that way. I think that would lower the defenses and people would be less paranoid. I'm not saying that what I've just described would happen. I think that's the fear. And I think that we should just work on that together.
Let's follow that, the logical. If you use that as the criteria, that it's somebody's personal religious view will be affected by protecting other people from discrimination, why not use it against blacks? My personal religious view is as apartheid, as in South Africa. And therefore, don't put that in the law because you're going to interfere with my religious freedom by taking away my ability to discriminate against black people or disable. That allows anybody to say it's my personal religious opinion, blah, 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 and any bubba can then say, well, I'm not discriminating against you because you're a woman, because I don't like women. I'm doing it because it is my right of conscience of my religion. That just doesn't, there is no connection.
I'll give you the connection in my mind. And it's already happened where we had faith-based adoption services You had the Catholics that had a very strong presence in Washington, D.C., where there were a lot of unwanted children that were born and needed to be placed in good homes. The LDS Family Services would do the same type of work. When the definition of marriage became more broader than what these faiths would consider a home in which they would want to place a child, they ended their efforts in that space. So you don't have faith-based family services as you once did, because the definition of marriage is beyond what these faiths would define it as, and they don't want to be on the wrong side of the law. I think that's already happened. I think so. I think that the worry is, let's articulate it very clearly. Let's make sure that there aren't consequences like that, because I think it's a shame. If you have faith-based adoption agencies, I don't know that it was the intent, but I don't know that it's a good thing that
You
they're
want to be
gone.
able to discriminate,
You know?
right? I mean, you want to be
Well,
able
no,
to
I
look
don't
at a
think we
great
want
gay
to.
couple
No,
that
Jim,
is going to
I
be
think that
perfect
there's
parents in
plenty of
every
adoption
way,
services
and then you want to dismiss them because they're gay, whereas you get a meth-headed other straight couple and say we'll give it to them.
I don't
based
think.
on that.
I think the meth head part would just totally reject them out of the.
Oh, the
think
meth
that
part
might-
would.
might-
Okay,
I
the
think
meth
I don't
might
think it's
get
going to
them
work.
out.
But
I'm
I-
saying
like-
just stop discrimination. That's what it ought
That
to be
would be
about.
the ultimate
But
goal.
what you're saying, though, is you're bleeding into those areas where people's beliefs within their faith could be seen as discrimination.
And
we,
it is.
We want to be careful about that.
So step out of that
All right,
circle.
that's where we're going to go. So I
All
think
right,
we're not
let's
going to
all
agree
just be
with
nice
it.
to other human beings. That's like really what we want to
But
do.
I think we could work something out.
I do.
I think we can work something
I actually
out.
do too.
Can we work something out with China?
No.
The tariffs have not. I thought we were going to, so I'm very disappointed.
I
so
love that you're a hawk on this.
I
I
know.
do. I love that you are just a saber rattler. You are. I love it.
they haven't gone into effect yet, but they're going to. Is someone going to back down
Look-
and an agreement's going to be made?
Let me ask the Utah Farm Bureau.
Okay.
The Utah Farm Bureau has conventions, and they have them every year, and they always send me the list. The Utah Farm Bureau is the Republican Party, and they're not just the Republican Party.
There's no
they're the-
Democrats who are farming. Is what you're trying
There
to tell
has
us?
never been a Utah Democrat invited to speak, not just as a main speaker, but on a panel or on a group or in a given introduction. This is totally not just Republican, but Trump Republican, the Utah Farm Bureau. And I'm saying, look what this policy has done. It is devastating Utah farmers.
It's already devastating or will
It already
devastate?
has. So many of our crops. The Mexicans now are finding brand new markets in Argentina and in Brazil. It isn't a matter of Trump playing his little games and then everything will be fine and everything will be happy. Markets don't wait like that. You can wait 20 years to set up a relationship and get that going with a country and markets. And then somebody's playing around for a year or two and people go find other markets. This is devastating. And I want to know when Utah farmers and when the Utah Farm Bureau is going to go, this symbiotic relationship we have with whatever Trump wants, Utah farmers are
But
screwed.
Jim, last week we talked about this, and you were pretty skeptical about China and its intentions in terms of its negotiations.
They
and
cheat.
you were a little worried about that. The status quo, I don't think, is serving us. I don't think that China's goods can come to this country without any tariffs at all, and anything we'd want to send over there
Agreed.
has tariffs, and I think there has to be an equilibrium. I don't know how you get there. I don't know that I think the brinkmanship that's going on right now between our federal government and the central government of China, it erodes goodwill, it wastes time and hurts our economy, and I do believe that we're not going to be able to ignore each other. There's no containment of these two countries in terms of the size of their economy. It's not like the Cold War where you could actually try to contain the Soviet Union economically. So given that is the case, how do you get to that equilibrium? I don't know any other way than to say, look, if you're going to keep those tariffs high, we're going to raise tariffs.
Can I suggest another
It's
way?
the
Greg?
short term.
Do you want
is
him to
painful.
text the president? Do you have his number?
I don't.
You got
all right.
Junior somewhere. Okay, so
I do have Junior's.
Look, the solution was there. Bush and Obama came up with it. They set up something called the TPP, which was all of the free market capitalist countries of Asia, 9 members. They set up this special trade organization, and when they went to the table, it was with the Chinese. And it wasn't this bilateral arrangement. It was everybody sitting down and saying to the Chinese, look, you got to stop stealing our copyrights. You have to do this. You've got to open your markets. Trump, the first thing he did, took that TPP along with organized labor that was frantic about it. They ripped it up, and now we're there bilaterally, one-on-one, instead of going with everybody. That was so much better an idea. It's a
Correct me if I'm wrong, though. I was at the Democratic National Convention a couple of years ago, and I recall in the audience seeing a lot of say no to TPP signs there.
Half of the party was against it, and half of it was for it. But there's only one, in my opinion, reasonable solution. You want to deal with the Chinese on one-on-one? You want to let them pick you off? Or do you want to sit down as a solid block with the Australians, with everybody in the region, and you sit down and you say, look, you guys, you do these things, or we're going to boycott, or we're going to do things.
I think the reason you've seen a change is I don't think that there was satisfaction that TPP was making the progress that was needed to see that equilibrium or see a more fair trade climate. So I think that's why the president did it. I will say this: spy games will happen. You're going to have, Russia that does it. You're going to have China, even the United States. I'm going to tell you, the Shah of Iran, what we're dealing with Iran today. Much of that you can point straight back to 78 and 79, where the United States was supporting the Shah, and there was the people that
or Mossadegh in the 50s.
So look, the United States the United States plays its games, and there's intelligence going on all over the world from all of these superpowers. Let's put that aside. I don't think our economies can survive without one another. I think it's naive, or I think it is reckless to imagine that somehow the United States will have trade partnerships around the world without China being a part of it. I think China would be as equally cavalier, crazy, reckless to think they're going to now find all their markets. I mean, you've got the state of California that's bigger than Australia. So, I mean, you're not going to find the buying power in a middle class like you have in the United States anywhere else. That's a good thing, actually, because they need one another. They need our economy, our economic relationships need to be strong. We need to have trade partnerships. I'm convinced that's going to happen. I don't think that the way it's going about right now, obviously it's having its impact, as Jim described, but we can't be impatient. We have to get to a place that's better than what the status quo was serving us before. But I think it's inevitable. We'll have an agreement here. So, my prediction, there'll be an agreement.
So you feel like President Trump's headed in the right direction?
I absolutely do.
It's hard to be patient,
but it's coming to the right place.
It's hard to be patient when you think the bus driver's insane.
I know you do, but I'm telling you, I think there's a method behind all this.
All right. It was Bernie Sanders. That had the no to TPP, right?
A lot of people.
All right, and he's got a lot of support right now, so it'll be interesting to see how this all shakes out.
Exactly.
It's a lot of questions
and
a lot to understand.
He's totally opposed to Bernie. I'm getting him in
feel
trouble
like you guys
with
would be
half his
friends.
party. I'm just making that up. Don't hold that to Jim. I just said that.
Greg.
I know.
All right, we've got to talk about this one because it's been such a big thing nationally. Abortion heartbeat bills is what we'll call them.
Yeah.
It seems almost like it's sweeping the nation right now. Greg, we'll start with you.
Yeah.
Some of these in Alabama, they're very, very strict, and I think even a lot of conservatives are uncomfortable with them. Are they going too far to make a point? Is this what they really want to see happen, or
Heidi,
what?
that is why people should listen to every word of every podcast we ever have.
That's right. So important.
We called the shot on this, okay? If you remember a number of weeks or maybe over a month ago,
Time flies when we're having fun.
We spoke about this when it was just Utah that we were talking about in terms of abortion bill, when abortion could be performed. And I made the point back then, Jim and I, and as well as you, we kind of talked about this. We talked about a pendulum. When the country began to hear concepts like terminating the life of a fetus after it is outside the mother's womb, and it can survive outside the womb, but should it still be terminated? That was becoming a political discussion.
Yeah.
And I think that is a pendulum that you see going far left. I think what you're seeing now with the abortion bills that are coming is an absolute reaction to and fear of how far outside of Roe v. Wade the political discussion began to be taken seriously. And that was not, if it's viable outside the mother's womb, now there's no abortion. They were talking about, I don't know what you call a baby or what. I don't want to make it sound too morbid, but if a baby could live outside the mother's womb, should you still be able to terminate, that that child's life. And there were straight-faced discussions and political arguments that you should be able to.
In Virginia and New York, I think is where that was happening.
And I think that's why you see a real
It's
recoil from that.
news. Nothing ever passed that way. There wasn't even a committee
But the
vote on
fact
that.
that it was
just
even
Fox
taken
News
seriously.
saying,
I know those, but there were legislators who've been elected by their people.
Even the
who
governor
were
of
concerned
Virginia
about
was
this.
talking about it seriously.
All right. Anyway, we can disagree on that. Let's get real here. Utah had no reason to do what it did. There is all this is a kabuki dance that is going to end up before one man. And unfortunately for people
God?
who believe in
No.
choice,
Who are we talking about?
God. But in this case,
That's a
it
swing-
will
who's your
be
swing
God.
vote? Who's your swing
I'm
vote?
talking about Justice Roberts. It used to be a more moderate. Now it means Justice Roberts, who's a strong institutionalist.
Yeah.
And it's all going to come down, and it's also a good chance for a lot of Republicans and Democrats to rile up their people and get their email names and on lists and raise money, and this is all part of this kind of weirdness
sides
of the
do that.
American democracy. But it all will pale. The Supreme Court will just sift through. They'll be deliberative. They'll take whatever cases they're going to take. And then when all the voting is done, very sadly, we all know how everybody will vote. And it'll come down to Roberts. And
He
that's
saved
what will be
Obamacare
decided.
for you, huh?
Yeah, no, that's what I mean. But you know what shouldn't happen? Supreme Court justices ought not to be predictable like politicians. They're not looking at political issues. They should be looking at the law and
Well, I hope
then
they all
deciding.
will,
And
because
they
it's
don't
headed in that
anymore, and that's bad.
I think they do. Actually, I think that's how Roberts finds himself on other sides of issues because he's not. I think he is trying to take those. Actually, I think even Brett Kavanaugh had a surprising vote that a lot of people on the right didn't think he'd make, but showed that he's taking these issues as they come. How about this though? The Alyssa, is her name Alyssa Milano? She was the little kid on Who's the Boss with Tony Danza, right?
Yeah.
She's an adult now.
She's all grown up.
She's
I see
all
her in
grown
Congress
up.
actually quite often in the audience.
Yeah, she gets very politically active. She has called, I think for the Georgia legislation, it was restrictive abortion law that was passed there for a sex strike. And she said, okay, all ladies, until these men quit telling us what to do, we're done here.
How about don't tell the girls that they can't have fun
How
either?
about, I think we called that abstinence. We called that abstinence at some point. I don't know what.
Seems irrelevant to me. First,
anyway, I think it's a
Second,
hilarious
is this just
strike.
for legislators or is this everybody?
No,
everybody.
she's saying, all ladies, we're going to teach these men a lesson. That's what she's saying, and I think that is a hilarious. I think that was you heard crickets
Are you in favor of
afterwards.
that?
She put that out there, and I don't think anybody
Everybody's like,
joined the cause. It was a funny moment in an otherwise wonkish political debate.
So many fun things to say, but we try to keep this rated PG-13 at least.
That was a funny one.
That was a funny one.
That is good.
And all this talk of abortion makes me think of a line. I have to loop back to Spencer Cox here in his video that he released this week in Running, saying that our nation hasn't been this divided since the Civil War. Do either of you agree with that? I sort of feel like we're feeling that way. I don't have a bayonet, luckily, so I'm not going to stab any neighbors. But do you feel like we're divided, or does it feel more divided because we get to talk about it on TV and social media? And
I fundamentally do not believe it's even close. But I do believe that because we are a smaller world in terms of our communications, the world is flat, so to speak. I think we feel it more. I think we're more aware of what goes on and the bickering. I don't like what's going on in Washington. It seems that if you're a Democrat, there isn't a single idea that could come from a Republican that Democrats would support. I think it's the other way around too. I think if there's an idea that Democrats like, the Republicans feel almost obligated to oppose it just out of hand. And I think that's a bad,
not a fun
bad
place
shape.
to be.
But I would not use it in the same sentence as the Civil War. I wouldn't. I would be careful about talk like that because I think we are, look at the world, more people are literacy through the world just in the last 20 years is so much stronger. The starvation and the hunger that was going on around the planet is almost non-existent at this point. There are so many things that are happening, not just in our country, but in the world that are good, but we do really focus on the tension and the controversy a lot. But I don't think it's the same.
Had a great hour and a half.
Nap? No, that's nice to me right now.
Hey, thanks, Heidi. I had a great hour and a half in his den with Governor Leavitt.
Just recently?
It's this week. And I'm going to tell you, there's a lot of wisdom there. There's a guy who was a governor for many, many years, went back, spent 6 years in Washington, headed up the EPA and HHS, and he knows politics. He kind of, I think, as good as anybody in the country, maybe. I mean, he really gets Washington and knows Utah completely. And he said, and this was in relationship between Salt Lake City and the rest of the state, he said, it's not uncommon. He said, you have a hardcore blue city, and then you've got suburbs that are more swing, but still pretty conservative. And then you've got rural, which are totally red. He said that there will always be this hostility between the core city, certainly in the rurals, and that fight over the suburbs, which Utah Democrats have lost for the last generation. They just can't talk to the suburbs. But what he was saying is, a lot of the issues we have now is we're clumped together with our clans. And if I got together maybe with some of Greg's people, you can't even believe we're in the same world. When the Mueller report comes out,
Yeah.
you know, I'm going to Rachel and seeing what she's saying, and then they're going to Fox, and we're feeding information. Somehow we got to have more camps where we're talking together, and less on political podcasts and more on barbecues and, you know, around Diet Cokes and glasses of beer, because we really are going to have to build this country back together again,
We have a lot
at
more
least
in
in that
common.
group.
It's
I
true.
mean, look at the real
I mean,
deals.
can I just, so my son, he's in 9th grade, and he's learning about American history. And it's really interesting to see our American history in the eyes of a young man who's 15 and just learning about it for the first time. And when he repeats back to me, Dad, they assassinated, they killed John F. Kennedy, and they killed Martin Luther King, and then they shot and they killed Bobby Kennedy. And you hear, for the first time as he's hearing these things, he goes, that is so scary. And I listened to my son, and I thought, my gosh, you know, we don't live in times at least like that. I mean, that is some pretty scary things when you read about it, especially hearing my son talk about learning that for the first time. We've grown up kind of knowing those terrible things that happened, but as he's just kind of looking at the 60s and he's looking at American history, I do think that we have lived through some pretty scary, scary times as a country. And so I would not put this as the time that would be similar to the Civil War.
I think that Jim Dabakis can sit down with former Governor Leavitt, Secretary Leavitt, for an hour and a half and be friends and get information out of it. We can all sit down because
We're going to do it regularly. I mean, we need a lot more of this. You know, we've got to. I think as far as the city is concerned and as far as the state is concerned, the divides we have are somewhat peculiar than other places. And we need to find ways to get LDS people talking to non-LDS people. If you've ever read the forum in the Tribune on anything, you realize that this divide is there. And I said that we need to begin working together and respecting each other.
Yeah.
You know, we need, and I come back to this because it's such a good example, but we need liquor laws in Salt Lake City about proximity and closeness to a park or to a library that fit Salt Lake City, not
each
Brigham
demographic.
City. You know, we're entirely different, and that's all in the hands of the LDS Church. And frankly, a lot of non-Mormons need to recognize that this is the Vatican for millions of people, and we need to respect that, and we need to be more mindful and work together. I think it goes both ways, but that's a vision that we can do right here at home to have this kind of dialogue.
I like dialogue. Before we go, though, one thing I think we can all come together on is wishing our best to Patrice Arent, who today on social media told all of her friends and her family that she's actually been battling cancer for the last almost 2 years, multiple myeloma. I hope I said that right. Which I believe is in your blood plasma. But she's been going to work. She's been at the legislature and says she'll keep serving her constituents, which she has done well. So we wish her the best. So
We do. I love serving with Patrice. She has so much institutional knowledge. She worked in the AG's office. She worked in ledge research as one of the legislative attorneys before serving in the House even in the Senate, came to her senses, realized it was,
There was a
the
better-
old and the slow, came back to the House where we are the arena, and love Patrice Aaron and wish her the best.
Oh, Patrice, you are unique, and that's not true about a lot of people in the legislature. She's unique, she's thorough, and she hasn't missed one day as a result of this 2 years
we
of
hope to
cancer.
see her
Surprised to
around
hear.
for a lot
Another
longer.
generation.
Absolutely. Well, it's been fun chatting this week, and I guess we will all have to wait on pins and needles for I don't know how many months to see if we'll actually sit down with Greg Hughes, who may or may not be running, and Spencer Cox on the same podcast, talking about issues that matter, because we're excited about
It's a
this race.
challenge, Cox.
It is a challenge.
Get
Maybe
over
I'll
here.
shave. I better shave for that. Tell me
Yeah.
when
You
that
should
comes
shave
up.
for
Shave your
Spencer Cox.
head
Yeah, I
just so
better
you
shave.
can be on the same balance.
Gotta get more clean
I got
cut.
questions for both of them.
You do? Wow.
Yeah. And you too, Ambassador Huntsman, or Netya Peruski at the Gavarit at the Ambassador Huntsman, Plazholsta. We want the Russians that monitor this to tell the ambassador he's welcome to come on
Okay.
the show, right?
I've heard that Putin's a regular listener, so I'm sure he'll love
Yeah.
that you spoke his language.
He gets around.
Big fan.
He
Big
does.
fan.
Well, I don't know what to say after that. Thanks for listening this week. We will be back next Friday again. Subscribe. It's the cool thing to do. Tell
Sign
your
up.
friends.
Yep.
Yeah, look at see the button right there in front of you if you're on television, and right above you on the radio, and
feels so
see where it
millennial.
goes subscribe, and then hit whatever thing you use, like Scrobiate or Pluckiate or whatever iTunes or whatever you're listening to.
May-
Those
Yeah, that was a compelling
That was
pitch.
compelling.
So
Have a
I'm
great
signing
day.
up right now.